Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our series of lessons on the Cold War. And so far, it's been going from bad to worse. We've had one sort of incident after another, one point of tension after the other, especially centered around Berlin, around Eastern Europe. The one kind of sliver of hope is that both sides, America and the Soviets, are stopping short of actual war. So, with the building of the Berlin Wall, which we looked at last lesson, it became really clear that both sides were prepared to go to quite extreme lengths to avoid actual fighting because they've seen the effects of the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So this lesson, we're going to focus on Cuba and we're going to look how and why it became such a problem. But first, I've got a bit of a recap for you. So we've got the Cold War dingbats. So you're going to see some pictures. They're going to spell out something to do with the course. If you worked it out and there's still a bit of time, what can you remember about it in relation to the Cold War? So first up, we have those two pictures. So pause the video if you need to. Well done, everyone saying Potsdam. So remember, Potsdam is one of the conferences. It's one of the three wartime conferences. So we have Tehran, Yalta, and Potsdam. We remember it with the saying, thank you, please. Potsdam, final conference during World War II. Next one. And this is a person, well done everyone, who was saying Churchill. So remember, he was British Prime Minister at the very start of our course. After he gets replaced by Attlee, do you remember he goes to America and he makes a speech, the Iron Curtain speech, that really stirs things up, makes everyone realize that Soviets and Americans aren't getting on very well. Okay, number 3. I think this was a trickier one. Well done, everyone saying Marshall Plan. So remember again, end of World War II, lots of countries in Europe are really poor. That makes them vulnerable to becoming communist. And America have this plan where they say that America will do what it can to stop countries falling to communism. The Marshall Plan. And last one. Well done, everyone who said Cuba, because I think that's quite a difficult one. And this is the country we're going to look at today. So you might have heard of an event called the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is the sort of background to it. This is the lead up to that. So this is where we are. We are really close to the United States. So you can see that just off the south coast of Florida, we have the island of Cuba. So far, the Cold War has been really distant for the US. It's been Eastern Europe, it's been Germany, it's been Hungary, it's been Russia. It hasn't been very close to home. And now all of a sudden, it's within 90 miles. It's Cuba. It's just on their doorstep. And so the Cold War is really about to get a lot more intense for the US, a lot more concerning, a lot more personal. But where our story starts, so right back at the beginning, actually at the beginning, Cuba and the US get on really well. So the US really like Cuba. There's an import on Cuban cigars, which are really famous. Cuban cigars, supposed to be the best in the world. But Cuba's main export is sugar. So lots of plantations in Cuba growing sugar bought by America. So America likes Cuba, Cuba likes America. What the Cubans don't like, however, is their leader at the time. So the gentleman in military uniform in the left, that's Batista. So he was very unpopular in Cuba to the point they have a revolution. In 1959, the Cuban people decide they've had enough of Batista and they get rid of him. And who they bring in is the gentleman on the right, that's Fidel Castro. And whereas Batista really likes America, Castro very much does not like America. So straight away, Castro starts confiscating land from American companies in Cuba. He encourages Americans to go back to America. Most Cubans are kind of on board with him. There are a few that are very pro-American that actually leave Cuba. So Cubans that go to America, mostly settling in Florida. So Cuba get rid of one leader, replace with another. Why are we studying this? It's because America is so unhappy with this that they lose the pro-American Batista, they get the anti-American Castro. And because they're not happy with it, they decide to come up with a plan of dealing with it. So it's called the Bay of Pigs invasion, and it's in April 1961. Bay of Pigs because there is a harbour in Cuba that has given the wonderful name Bay of Pigs. No actual pigs involved in this story. So really, it's nothing to do with America. America shouldn't be getting involved at all. If Cuba want to replace the leader, that's Cuba's business. If you don't like the new leader, well, that's tough to be you, America. But the president at the time, Kennedy, decides he's not going to stand for this. He is going to come up with what he thinks is a brilliant plan to get rid of Castro. So they can't just send American soldiers in there. That's an act of war. The rest of the world would be horrified. So Kennedy gets a bit sneaky and he thinks, well, we've got all these Cubans who've come to America because they don't like Castro. We can't invade Cuba, but they can because they're Cuban. No one will be outraged if Cubans invade Cuba. So the plan was America would gather these Cubans in America together, train them, give them weapons, drop them back in Cuba. The drop off point is going to be the Bay of Pigs. Then they'll sail away. The pro American Cubans will start a revolution. They'll get rid of Castro. They'll bring in someone that's pro American. Life gets back to normal. And the Americans will act surprised. They'll be like, oh my goodness, there was an uprising. We had no idea that was happening. That's the plan. And it goes so horribly wrong in the scale of like mess ups in history. The Bay of Pigs, sometimes called the Bay of Pigs invasion, other times called the Bay of Pigs disaster, because it's a massive disaster for America. So the Cubans land, the Cuban exiles, they land at the Bay of Pigs, and the revolution fails almost instantly. There's no support from the other Cubans who've stayed. They're all like, actually, Castro's doing a good job. We don't want to get rid of him. The exiles are captured, and very quickly everyone realizes that America has been helping them out. And there's huge outrage, as you can imagine. So, just a quick summary before we move on. So, Cuba at the start, really pro America, everything's great. Cuban Revolution brings in Castro, who's anti American. That should really have been the end of the story. But America decides to interfere and try to overthrow Castro, resulting in a huge failure. So consequences of the Bay of Pig disaster. People died in it. There was actual fighting. It cost lives. 1,200 prisoners were taken. So those Cubans that had fled to America and then were brought back. It's an absolute disaster for America. So remember Kennedy, he's really young. He's the youngest elected president at that time. He's seen as very inexperienced. And now he's gone and made this catastrophic mistake. So lots of people looking at him going, well, we were right about you. We thought you were too young and inexperienced, and you've proven us right. What also makes it awkward is America has spent the last decade and a half criticizing the Soviets for interfering in other countries. So they've spent since the start of the Cold War being like, oh my goodness, Soviets, you've got to stop interfering. You interfere in Germany, you interfere in Poland, you interfere in Hungary. You need to stop that. And now they've been caught doing exactly the same thing. And you just know that Khrushchev had his best morning of his life when he woke up and found out with the rest of the world what America had been up to. So the Soviets are loving this. They're like, oh my goodness, America, you are such a hypocrite. It also helps the Soviets because poor Cuba, and in particular Castro, is like, what is going on? What do you mean America's trying to overthrow me? So Castro's looking around, they're looking around for protection, and there are the Soviets, ready to lend a friendly ear, being like, yeah, America is awful. Don't worry, we'll protect you. So you can't blame Cuba for going closer to the Soviets. Kennedy not happy about this. He didn't like Cuba before, but now he really doesn't like it because the Soviets are giving weapons to Cuba. Castro is like, yeah, I'm getting weapons. You tried to overthrow me at the Bay of Pigs. I want weapons. Soviets are happy to give it to them. It's America that's concerned. So Kennedy comes out and says he would prevent the Soviets giving nuclear missiles on Cuba by whatever means necessary. Kennedy becomes more aggressive, increasing money spent on the military, authorizing US spy planes to regularly fly over Cuba. And it's those spy planes that are going to see the missiles being put on Cuba. It's going to lead us into the Cuban Missile Crisis. So just before we go, I just thought we'd do a practice P paragraph. So if we imagine that the question is the consequences of the Bay of Pigs invasion or the failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion. So we started with our point. With our point, we just reword the question. So one consequence of the Bay of Pigs was that it pushed Cuba and the Soviets together. Then we give more evidence. We're just proving to the examiner that we know our stuff, we've revised. There was an improvement in their relationship because Castro felt as though the USA had become an enemy and that the Soviets would be better placed to support Cuba economically, so buying all that sugar from them. And then we finish off with an explanation. Anytime we explain, we go, this meant that. This meant that the USA's policy of containing communism was failing because the Soviet sphere of influence had spread to only 90 miles away from the USA. And this is what we're going to look at next lesson, how it all comes to a head with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Closest the countries come to actual nuclear war. So the Cuban Missile Crisis, next lesson.